When I started playing Melee, one of the biggest misconceptions I had about Falco was that laser was a simple move. I mean, its design isn't that complicated on the surface. You just short hop, and then you press the B button, and then boom. A projectile comes out that does a trivial amount of damage and a bit of hit stun. But laser is one of the quirkiest, and one of the most interesting moves in all of Melee. It's a centralizing move in every matchup that involves the blue bird, to the point that every player going into a game against a Falco needs to have a game plan to specifically deal with lasers, or else they're going to get run over. It's a move with an insane amount of detail. There's even a channel specific to chatter about laser in the Falco Discord. But I want to take a step back from the nuance and take a more holistic look at the rich metagame that's developed around Falco's neutral B. Laser is interesting because despite the seemingly simple inputs, there are a bajillion different ways to shoot laser and a bajillion other ways for opponents to play around laser. There is an insanely deep amount of interaction that happens every single time a Falco shoots the gun. I think the first step in really understanding what's going on beneath the surface is to first talk about what laser is and what role it plays. Lasers fill an extremely unorthodox set of niches that are unique to Falco. Their immense range means that Falco mains can disrupt their opponent from seemingly anywhere on stage. They are also projectiles which have what is known as transcendent priority, which means that they aren't cancelled out when colliding with any other move. This is especially powerful, considering that not all projectiles have this property, limiting the ways you can play around laser. In a game primarily played around horizontal spacing, Falco circumvents the traditional models for thinking about the game by having a projectile that forces players to escape vertically, either to the air or to play a more platform-centric style. Laser allows Falco to have a natural, low-commitment chase on characters moving away on the ground, whereas other characters trying to cover similar spaces have to put themselves at great risk by overshooting heavily with their own bodies. Falco's laser only does 3% unscaled, which isn't anything to call home about, but its hit stun is what makes the move so disruptive. Melee is a fluid game that centers around responsive and flexible movement that players spend years mastering. But laser turns the game into a strange inverse rhythm game, where Falco picks a tempo, and their opponent scrambles to fit inputs in between notes. To properly move around a Falco shooting lasers, the non-Falco needs to be holding state of many different parts of the screen. They need to pay attention to the constantly changing spacing between their character model and incoming lasers, so that they can figure out when they're going to get hit. On top of this, they're still of course playing the game against the Falco, which gives players another thing on screen to worry about. And of course, Falco can be a huge nuisance by constantly mixing up how they shoot lasers, and so a complete anti-laser game plan needs to be improvisational. This all leads to there being a high skill floor for playing against Falco, which explains why there are so many Reddit threads dedicated to complaining about lasers. If you're a new player playing the matchup, lasers make you feel like you're playing on a controller that's randomly deciding to eat your inputs. But despite being initially frustrating to deal with, Falco's laser isn't that game defining on its own. A few pot shots does less than a single move might, and 12 frames of hit stun does not make for a consistent combo opener unless Falco scores an approaching laser right on top of their opponent. Laser's short hit stun window is incredibly practicable timing that when mastered gives players a ton of maneuverability. When I was just starting to learn Fox, I was really surprised to learn that I could actually fit in a dashing short hop aerial with precise inputs between lasers, and that learning to take laser and dash away was enough to essentially invalidate all sorts of laser openings Falco players at my skill level were trying to force on me. It takes experience and practice, but learning to shed mental hit stun where we just get caught with our pants down not knowing when to press buttons pays huge dividends in the matchup. At the top level, players will take laser into throwing out hitboxes or shields or basically anything else you can imagine to really dissuade Falco from thinking they can just get a freebie for landing a laser. There's also a ton of other niche strategies that can help take the edge off of lasers. You can simply get off the ground to make it difficult for Falco to laser you. You could learn to power shield lasers to send them back. You could even crouch cancel them to slightly reduce the already pretty small amount of hit stun. But despite all of this, Falco's laser remains a staple in the metagame. It's strong, but not broken, and it's got counterplay, but it's certainly not a gimmick. Back when I was getting trunched by aggressive Falcos, I found a choice KJH video that explained to me the wonders of taking laser and dashing back. I had a glorious afternoon of practice, fantasizing about dunking on any Falco who dared shoot a laser against me in the future. But of course, the next time I played a Falco, they just moved on to the next level of the interaction and started shooting 2 lasers in place instead of just 1. It would be a huge mistake to think of laser as a purely one-dimensional move that simply disappears once you learn a few tricks. There are an insane number of different drifts, spacings, heights, and timings that Falcos can mix up when shooting a laser. There's no single piece of counterplay that can invalidate all of them. To really understand this concept, we need to have a more nuanced understanding of laser as a move. When a Falco shoots a laser, they're precisely covering a specific category of movement option because laser simply can't cover everything. High lasers are effective at covering short hop height jump-ins, but are weak to players ducking under and low profiling them. Low lasers are effective at covering more grounded approaches, but lose to jump-ins. Every laser is a precise scalpel that carves out a particular section of the screen. That also leaves Falco wide open with a ton of other blind spots. Short hop laser by itself is a little too fast and non-committal to get a free punish every time, but with a slight read, it's definitely possible to get in on a Falco just spamming the gun. If a player reads when a Falco is going to laser, they can get in their face and stuff it before it comes out. If a player reads how a Falco is going to laser, they can avoid that part of the screen and abuse the fact that Falco is committing to putting out a hitbox that doesn't cover their body. If a player reads what a Falco is planning on doing after a laser, they can do an option that circumvents that instead. There's also a more meta method of indirectly countering a laser by making a Falco feel uneasy about shooting one to begin with. Laser is a risky option because it is so precise and does have severe blind spots. If a Falco is scared of shooting lasers because they don't have a good read on what their opponent is going to do next, they'll simply shoot less lasers. I can only really speak to the Fox-Falco matchup, but this is why a lot of Fox players end up playing in a mid-range, where they're constantly threatening to jump in between lasers with short hop or full hop approaches. Or picking stages like Yoshi's Story, where they can retreat to platforms that give them all sorts of awkward attack angles that Falco would have trouble covering with laser. But of course, a good Falco knows that laser pressure isn't free, and knows that as much fun as it is to shoot infinity lasers and watch their opponent pull out their hair, they need to stay ambiguous between applying laser pressure and doing other options, like dash dancing, to keep themselves unpredictable. And just how a Falco player might feel uncomfortable shooting lasers if they feel threatened, Falco players can make their opponents feel uncomfortable jumping in, by rounding out their laser game with a solid defensive game. Retreating short hop dare, retreating short hop auto cancel back air, shine out of shield, and ASDI down shine are all effective tools that make a Falco's opponent think twice about trying to come in. When all put together, standing back and spamming laser makes players feel like they need to approach, while Falco's strong defensive options make players feel like they need to stay out. This duality makes Falco terrifying to play neutral with. And a good Falco player who understands what their opponent is trying to do around lasers can adapt around that too. Players can learn to power shield lasers to throw inexperienced Falcos off guard, but Falco can also shoot lasers that are almost impossible to power shield consistently, or simply jump over returning lasers while shooting more of their own. If a player becomes too reliant on any take laser option, like throwing out a hitbox, Falco can simply shoot the gun and then do a soft read to convert off of their opponent being predictable, even if they're executing properly. The meta around laser is rich with counterplay, 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 and quickly becomes absurd. Every Falco matchup ends up being a series of highly interactive poker hands that gets continued every time Falco decides to shoot a laser. Both players are hoping to make some sort of read on what their opponents are trying to do, and both players are also constantly defensively mixing up to avoid playing in a way that can be exploited. Falco players sneak in as many pot shots as they can, being careful with how they shoot them while trying to gauge how they think their opponent is going to react to the incoming pressure, and their opponents fight to keep composure, to not overreact and commit poorly into Falco's loving arms, while hunting for the perfect chance to strike decisively. At the top level, a perfectly timed laser can totally throw an opponent off guard, and open them up for a Falco to go hamburgers, and an awful predictable laser can end up being a complete dud that loses them a stock. This is the beautiful part of the game, where Melee transcends just being a mishmash of frame data and execution tests, and becomes an interactive conversation between two thinking opponents. We've only really scratched the surface of all of this. Falco's laser can also be used as a combo extender, as an edge guarding tool, as a ledge option, and even as shield pressure. I can't begin to imagine how complex the mind games get in Falco dittos. But I hope this video serves to just give a small taste of how much depth can go into a simple interaction that most players might not think twice about. Melee is full of these sorts of mini metagames and mix-ups, like playing around Fox's insane ledge game, and Marth's absurdly large hands, or Puff's 5 jumps. But those are all topics for another day. Thanks for watching.